Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the lore behind the show slash movie slash giving me an excuse to watch TV all day slash movies all day and keeping my parents proud. So today we are going to be talking about the series, or at least one of the episodes within the series of American Horror Story. We're going to be talking about Murder House and the episode 1 of Murder House. So get your crystals, get some holy water, get some sage. You might need it after this. And here we go. So Murder House is, to give some background on the episode, and I'm going to say spoiler. Murder House is basically about this family that has something really horrific happen to them, and they relocate from the East Coast to the West Coast. They move to California as a way of trying to restart their lives and give themselves a second chance. At least the parents want to give themselves a second chance. So there's that. So to get into pieces of the episode, we see a few things happen very, very early on within the episode, and I'm going to jump around a little bit to try to keep certain ideas together, as opposed to talking about the way I did with last week's episode, where I talked about the way the episode actually aired on TV. So we are introduced to Ben Harmon, Vivian, his wife, and their daughter, Violet. And we're introduced to them in such a way where we find out that the reason why they are relocating from the East Coast to California is because the mother, Vivian, suffered an extremely horrific, brutal miscarriage. And unfortunately, Ben cheated on her with one of his students. So we are told very early on that there's a lot of trauma that's associated within their family, and that's what's causing them to attempt to start over. So when I do get a chance to be able to talk about how names correlate to people, I'm going to try to definitely bring it up. I probably should have brought up in the Supernatural TV series, their last name is Winchester. Winchesters are guns, and they, for the first 5 seasons, they really talk about the cult. So anyway, this is about American Horror Story, not Supernatural. So when we look at the lore behind the names Vivian and the lore behind the name Violet, we see a few different things that actually really show about a number of different things that go on within their character, and for the most part, their story arc. So depending on how much you know about night mythology, might play to the idea of like what you know about Vivian's name and who Vivian is within that particular type of mythology. So Vivian is a name that generally relates to being alive. Vivian, also within night mythology, was the lover slash wife slash girlfriend of Merlin the Magician, which I think is really interesting. Sometimes she is referred to as the Lady of the Lake, or the Lady of the Lake. And there's a number of things that kind of also talk about her and the advice that she gives knights. And she makes this comment along the lines of like, or at least she's allegedly known to make this comment along the lines of like, knights should have 2 different hearts. One should be hard as diamonds, so they can avoid treachery and cruelty of others, and they're not as susceptible to it. And there's another heart that they should have that should be as soft as wax. That way it can help them bend and be able to follow people that are good and help them be gracious people. So that I think is really, really interesting, because as you see throughout the season, Vivian really had to harden her heart after everything that happened with the loss of her child and her husband cheating on her. She hardened her heart, and you also see her trying to soften it, and she's trying really hard to get the relationship back and to make things better, and to really try to bring the relationship better, because she does want to get back into the beauty and the goodness and the graciousness that she originally had within the relationship. There's also scenes within the show, within the episode especially, where, Ben is saying to her, he's like, I love you. He's like, we had so much fun together. He's like, things were so personal, and, sometimes they were a little weird. He's like, but it was us. And, it really, really kind of like talks about this kind of metamorphosis of Vivian's heart and the manner of which her heart heals within the first season. So that I think is interesting. Violet as a character, so within occult lore, violets are not just within occult lore, but violets are a color and a flower, and generally the color of and the flower are associated within occult lore of death and rebirth, specifically in that order. And we see, again, spoiler, we see this happen with Violet in the season. There's this death, and she's reborn into this new character, to this new being, and she falls in love with Tate. And because of that, I think, because of that, it really kind of gives a nice little showing of the way her character is. And when you get that opportunity to be able to talk about why characters are named what they are and what their names kind of mean, I think it's really, it's kind of cool. And so that is a little bit of the lore behind the name Vivian and the name Violet. There's also a scene within, and again, I'm going to jump around within the episode as opposed to going like from the start to finish, because I want to try to keep, there's so many examples of things that happen, not only within the entire series, but within this particular episode that really, really do a good job of explaining something or explaining things as a whole. It's a very full episode, and it shows that the people behind doing the research of American Horror Story really had a good idea of what they were talking about and how they wanted to show things, how they wanted to show haunted houses and spirits being bound to areas and things like that. So I think it's really, really, it's just cool. Like, you know, pat. So I'm going to talk about, I want to talk about blood ritual kindalistic things. I also want to talk about sage and smudging, because that happens within the episode. And I really would like to end this episode with talking about the difference between haunted land, haunted houses, haunted objects, haunted people, and how spirits manifest themselves. So I'd like to end it that way, hopefully. And hopefully that's the way we keep it, because I can kind of be all over the place, which is why I have to give myself notes. So throughout occult lore, okay, so I'm going to have to talk about Faust. So throughout occult lore, there is a lot of things that allude to giving blood in the essence of something, or to give blood in the essence of maintaining a spell, gaining dominion over something, and things like that. There's also this idea that, it's not an idea, so there's also this alchemist, and I have a hard time referring to him as an alchemist, because I genuinely think that he was just a person who made a demon deal and knew what he was asking for when he made this demon deal, a guy named Faust. Faust is a very well-known within the occult alchemist, and he was known for like driving snakes out of places. He was known for doing a number of different things, being able to like work with the elements and stuff like that. So that was then at that time considered alchemy and so forth and so forth. But again, he was given that power because he made a demon deal. So I have a hard time just saying that he was an alchemist because of that. So, and part of the demon deal, by the way, was not only him getting the power, but him being able, during the 10-year time span that this deal was active, was sleeping with a new woman every night. And the demon actually had an issue with that, but that's another issue I have. Anyway, so there's these scenes within occult lore, and there's these ideas within occult lore that, and some New England witches, depending on the type of witch you are, or the type of beliefs that you have, talk about the idea of signing your name over to the devil in your own blood. You see this within Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. She signs in her blood, in the Book of the Devil, her name. So there's lore that kind of goes back and forth of two different schools of thought. One is that the devil is afraid of blood because it's life-giving and life-preserving. And I think it actually has more to do with the fact that, like, because blood is so life-giving and life-preserving, it has to be willingly given to him, in the essence for him to have dominion over you, to be able to grant you these powers or whatever it is. I think, the bulk of the piece of the lore. And the reason why I say that is to say this. There's a number of scenes within the episode, even within the entire season, where blood is such a potent thing that they talk about. There's a scene in the beginning where Vivian is talking about when she miscarries, that there was just so much blood and she's happy that there's not that much blood. There's a scene where when Vivian catches her husband, Ben, cheating on her, she like slices his arm open and he's bleeding. There's a scene where Tate is, so spoiler, Tate is a ghost and he is remembering events that led to his death and led to the death of others. So there's this scene where Tate is talking about Native American lore or different types of lore. And he's talking about the concept of bloodletting and how they believed back then that if you were to cut somebody in certain parts of their body, the illness or the bad spirit would be able to be drawn out with the blood. Again, because this concept of blood being life-sustaining and life-preserving and being able to like manifest your spirit within blood. So those are pieces of it. Tate also makes this comment that he was like, he goes, I feel like I felt like I was drowning in the blood, right? Because he killed all these kids. So in a way he was drowning in the blood, right? He drowned in his own blood. So there's a lot of little things that go on within that episode that really, really talk about blood and the concept of blood binding you and the concept of sacrificial blood in a way. And, you know, in a way, it makes me wonder, at least it makes me think about the events that, and we talked about this in the last episode, the events that lead you or lead someone to have an experience of a haunting or to have an experience of something malevolent happening and being drawn to an area like places like the Clifton Gates of Gates of Hell. Being drawn to an area based on that stuff. And and I also think it talks about how energies are attracted to things. So that's why, you know, people say, oh, you know, try to look on the brighter side of things. It's about an energy that's actually happening. So while we're talking about energies, I think it's important to talk about another aspect within the episode, which is when Jessica Lange's character, Constance, she's looking for her daughter, Addie, who manages to get in the house and like tell Vivian she's gonna die there. And she brings her sage. She brings her specifically white sage. And Jessica Lange makes this comment that this is, you know, oh, you should burn the sage. It'll get rid, there's too much bad juju here. It'll get rid of the bad juju. There's too many bad memories here. So this is a great gift to give to somebody, especially when they first move into a house. It helps with the ions in the air and things like that. So before I start talking about ions and the chemical compound of sage, sage is used by many different cultures. I think we as a society generally believe that Native Americans use it the most, and I think that's kind of where pieces of the lore go into. I also think it's interesting that Tate talks about Native American behaviors in the context of bloodletting, and then his mom, Jessica Lange, brings over sage, which is a Native American herb, basically. So I think that's also very, very interesting. And it also later then kind of talks about why the land itself is haunted, but there's a lot of pieces that really, really go in together, and it seems like I'm talking all over the place, but all these things really, really work itself out. And they really did a good job, at least within the first episode, of keeping things within the occult lore. So other than different cultures using it and it being kind of not placated, that's the wrong word, played into the idea of Native American culture, sage works by releasing negative ions into the air. Now, negative ions aren't a bad thing, they're just ions. So if you think about it from a quite literal concept, right? Quite literal idea. When you feel like you have to burn sage, there almost seems like there's too much energy within a room or too much of something within the room. So what it does, because there's so much, there's an excess of positive energy, it'll, when you're burning it, the smoke releases negative ions to balance it out, which is why you generally feel uplifted after it, because it's quite literally shifting the ions in the air. Sage is also has been known to keep funguses at bay, bacteria, viruses, and things like that. I'm not saying you have to do this in low doses. I'm not saying have sage burning in your house all day long. That's really not a good idea, because breathing in a lot of smoke is not a good idea. But again, this is parts of what sage does. Sage also, white sage specifically, and there's another form of sage that has this, releases a chemical compound called Thujone, Thujone. This compound is also found in absinthe, which I think is cool that there's a correlation there. Especially when you really understand why sage works the way it does and why it was used during Native American practices before people would go into tribal things, tribal conversations, the chiefs and things like that. So it was, so this chemical compound, I'm not going to say it again because I 100,000,000% pronounced it wrong. I can barely remember how to say my own name sometimes. Sorry. Am I? I don't know. So this compound is known to elevate your mood. When you breathe it in low doses, it helps elevate your mood, and it helps you put yourself into a more sedative. It works kind of like a sedative in the similar sense of the way absinthe does. And absinthe can lead to hallucinations. So in doses, you can hallucinate while having an elevated mood from burning sage in low dosage. So it's something to think about. They do get it right. They really do get it right when Constance Jessica Lang makes this comment, get rid of some of this bad energy, the bad juju in the house. That's what it does, because it's changing the ions in the air. It's helping elevate your mood and things like that. Where they unfortunately get it wrong is the manner in which Vivian actually smudges her house. Sage, when you're burning sage and you're moving it through the house, it's called smudging. So when you start doing these practices, you have to open your windows, and you should be going from the back of your house to the front of your house. You have to be moving forward. You can't be moving backwards. Different practitioners do it from south to north, or from east to west, or whatever it is. Different practitioners do it different ways. I am of the firm belief of doing it from the back to the front. If you are on a 2-level house, you got to do it again from the back to the front. So that's something to really, really think about. And there's also scenes within that particular part of the episode where she's burning the sage, and you start hearing things in the background. You start hearing things being dropped. There's a thing that kind of alerts her to a sound in the attic. She hears something in the attic. So I think it's something really interesting, because, and this is why practitioners say you got to open your windows and you got to open all these doors, you got to do it under the bed, because the spirits are moving in the opposite directions. They're just getting away from her. They can't go anywhere else but a different part of the house, which is, again, why practitioners say you got to open the window. And open your doors and do all that stuff, because they can go into different places and hide. And it also kind of shows that, hey, sage does work. It's helping remove this energy, but if you don't have a spot where the energy can be really released from, it's going to stay in the house. So she's distracted by a sound in the attic, and she goes up there and she stops saging. She stops saging her house. Now, if you start saging your house, I'll say this: don't stop. Keep doing it. You can't stop saging your house, especially when you're in the middle of doing this practice. All it does is just piss off those spirits. So you have to continue doing these things, and it almost in a way kind of awakens spirits. Pat. It almost in a way awakens spirits to say, hey, you know what? She's trying to remove this energy within this house. Let's kick it up a notch. So that's little pieces of the saging and the smudging that Vivian does within the house, and they do get it right. get rid of some of the bad juju that's within the house. There is also, throughout the episode, there's things that kind of make you wonder, or at least make me wonder. Is the land haunted? Is the house haunted? Are the objects in the house haunted? Is it the people that are in the house that are haunted in some way? And quite technically, it's all of it, because we later find out in later seasons that it is a hellmouth. Not going to go too far into what hellmouths are, just because I don't have the time and I don't want this to be a super long video. It's already long enough. But if you find yourself, now that I've said that these things can be haunted, if you find yourself wondering, like, or at least saying to yourself, I didn't realize all these things could be haunted, or maybe you did know that these things could be haunted, you find yourself saying, okay, well, which is the what is haunted within this house? And because it's a hellmouth, everything is haunted. The land itself was used for something really horrific. You find out later on in the series. The house itself, there's so much death and destruction within the house. The bones of the ghosts that actually died on the property are buried on the property. The object that the surgeon uses later on in the season to do the horrible things that he does are still in the house. And this idea that because the land was already haunted, that there were spirits there, that they were haunting the people that were there. So I think that's pieces of it. So when you think about, if we think about each piece kind of by itself, what makes something haunted, what makes an item haunted, a house, an object, whatever it is, it has to do with energies in which the spirit is attached to. That's why people say, and I think I might have said this already, you got to have good energy about you. You got to look on the brighter side of things, because there's an attachment that's associated with negative energies and negative ghost spirits and things like that. And so in a way, anything could be haunted. My phone could be haunted, right? If I die holding my phone in my hand, I fucking hope not. If I die holding my phone in my hand, my phone can become haunted. You see planes get haunted when they use parts of planes in another plane, then that plane crashes. Parts of the plane are haunted because of the trauma that's associated with the item, or the land, or the house, or whatever it is. It's all energy that's based within something. So the reason why I say that is, if you think people have like a hesitation to buying old houses because of, at least when we lived in Long Island, I was like, oh, this house is haunted. And, people have this idea that because a house is old, it's automatically haunted and has the energies of the former residents that live there. You can move into a brand new house and buy an antique piece of furniture, or you could be haunted already and take that with you into the new house. And then that binds the spirit not only to you, but to the house that you're living in. So it's all energies. It's all energies within something, energies, and a lot of it is played into the idea of negative energy being stronger than positive energy for something. This also, I kind of want to backtrack a little bit because there's some objects that we see. So in the very first part of the episode, we see these two twins go into the house before the Harmons move into it. And one of the twins says to the other one, "This place smells like shit. I want to get out of here." Some of the most interesting things that come to hauntings and that can give you an idea of what type of haunting is going on is the smells that are associated with it. Certain haunted houses have ectoplasm that leak out of certain places. If you have that, get out of the house. Get out. So, and then some places have smells, right? And generally people associate the smell with dead animals being in the house. And there's a number of jars that you see within the basement where it's like, it appears to be like a human ear, fetal pigs and frogs and things like that, eyes. And the idea of smells being associated with spirits in a negative way is true. You smell sulfur, and the where that lore very specifically comes from is the concept of not only the smell of sulfur, but the concept of like fire and brimstone, which I think is like so interesting that they brought that up, especially because it's a hellmouth, right? So of course, if your house is above a hellmouth, you are going to be smelling fire and brimstone, which often smells like sulfur because these malevolent spirits are in the house. So it all ties together, which is very exciting. Not for the people that live in a haunted house, but exciting from a TV show capacity because they get it right. So I think that's really, really interesting. If we talk about how spirits manifest themselves, since we're right now talking about these two little boys that died in the house, they show you how they die. Spirit, a very angry looking, demonic looking spirit attacks them, slices the boys' throats open, and whatever it is. So you see the scene later on where Addie is like laughing and pointing at the boys behind Vivian, and they show themselves in the manner of which they died because that's the way Addie saw them. She saw them die that way. She saw their bodies in that manner, so that's the way she sees them, and that's the way they are showing themselves to them. Something interesting to acknowledge, and I want to make sure I say this because I think it can prevent a few things. Spirits will manifest themselves, and this is something that I've learned from one of my teachers within the occult. I have an amazing teacher within the occult, and she said this to me a number of years ago. And she said that spirits can manifest themselves in the way that will give them the most access to whatever energy is in the room. So this works for good spirits and bad spirits. You find it more with bad spirits that have malevolent spirits that have bad deaths, traumatic deaths, etc., etc. They show themselves in a way that you will be able to accept them and see them so they can start wreaking havoc whatever way they want to wreak havoc. And the reason why I bring this up is not only for those two boys because of the way Addie sees them, but the manner of which we see Moira, the way Vivian we as a watcher, and Vivian and Ben, the way they see Moira. Vivian sees Moira as an older woman with a glass eye, a cloudy glass eye. Ben sees her as this like beautiful knockout woman, and with like this short maid dress and like the stockings or whatever. He sees her as this very hypersexualized woman. So it's a matter of this spirit, and we later find out why she's there. We find that this spirit is manifesting herself so that she can maintain and stay on the property. Because while she's not entirely a bad spirit, and it also makes you wonder, like, is the younger version of Moira more of like a woman in white type scenario where she's like, she's trying to get these men to like cheat on their wives or whatever because that's how she died and she wants to wreak this havoc. And then this older Moira shows kind of this like this sorrow that she has for dying and being away from her mother and being able to be at rest. So when we see this like kind of manifestation of how Moira's seen between these two people, Vivian turns to Ben and she's like, oh, I like her. She seems a little kooky, but she seems great. Like, I would like to hire her. And Ben's like, are you kidding me? Like, you surprise me every day. And he thinks like, oh my God, my wife is hiring this like super hot maid because she trusts me. And the wife is just kind of like, nah, I'm hiring this old broad to come clean the house, not really knowing that they're spirits. So then she gives permission for Moira to come back and to be present in the house. And in a way there's power that's given to Moira for this when this happens. So I think that's really, really interesting. There's also scenes where Tate, it's such a good episode, and it's so well thought out, right? So there's scenes when Tate is talking to Ben during therapy that he sees himself covered in blood because that's how he died, and it's so interesting because it's like he sees himself that way, and he's starting to see the pieces of how he died, almost in an echo type way. And, the whole thing with Moira and these like twins kind of running around the house and like, it's so interesting. So the manifestation of spirits generally relate to being able to gain access to something or to gain access to whatever, right? So that's really interesting. I really, really like it. And American Horror Story season one, for the most part, there's things within the actual entire season. If I do another episode, I want to kind of jump around for movies and shows and things like that. There's so much out there, but there's things throughout season one and other seasons that really show kind of like the thread that's kind of built into the mythology of what their characters are supposed to be doing, what their spirits are supposed to be doing, and so forth and so forth and so forth. You also see later on, piece of information, you also see later on these spirits manifest themselves on like Halloween, and it's not about the veil being, well, this is true, the veil is thinner. It's more about Sam Hain and not so much about the veil. Sam Hain is, I'm not gonna talk about Sam Hain because I can spend like hours talking about this guy, this demon, this thing, this entity, but it's more about Sam Hain than anything. So that's Jack, and I think that's my cue to maybe end the video right here. So leave your comments below. Let me know what crystal you grabbed to keep yourself safe within this conversation, this slightly spooky conversation. Let me know if I addressed everything within the first episode, at least, that you wanted to learn about. Leave your comments below, and I'll check you later.